Howdy, I'm Ben Yee, Secretary of the Manhattan Democratic Party and Democratic State Committee for the 66th Assembly District.
I'm not going to say howdy, I'm just going to say hi. Alyssa Stein. I am a county committee member of Assembly District 66 Part A and also the secretary of that part.
And you're also out of the shot again. Oh. Come there.
But the view is so beautiful.
It's gorgeous.
It's a fall sky, the sun is setting, so I think that people would rather look at the buildings downtown than my hair. So we'll work back and forth. We're here to do part 2, our first ever part 2, talking about the Constitutional Convention.
That's right.
In the last little segment, we talked about sort of what it is and how it happens. So now we're here to delve into more specifics.
Right. So the big question at the end of Constitutional Convention Part 1 was whether or not it was a good thing and what we can expect, what we might be able to expect from a constitutional convention.
And also, what I was surprised at is by what I thought was a really great idea, so many people were saying no to. And one of the things I've heard floated around a lot is that the Constitutional Convention outcomes will depend on the delegates who are sent.
That's absolutely correct.
So can you talk about how delegates are selected? I know you said something about how there are 3 per Senate district.
Yes.
How do they get selected? Who can run? Who either be on the ballot? But how does that tip the balance into what the outcomes could be?
Right. So long story short, every Senate district gets 3 delegates, and there are 15 at-large delegates. They operate under the same rules as standard election law, basically. So what that means is there will be primaries, and the parties will run slates of candidates, 3 per assembly district and then 15 per Senate district and then 15 statewide. And then individuals may get on the ballot and run independently. Now, standard election law, if you're going to run with a political party, you need to petition to get on the ballot in the primary. So there'll be primaries, there'll be a bunch of people running, and then Democratic voters will vote on who should represent the Democrats in the general election. And the same thing goes for the Republicans and the Working Families Party and what have you. However, because the Constitutional Convention is somewhat out of the ordinary, there will probably be a lot of independents or individuals who want to run, unaffiliated with any party. They will also be able to petition to get on the ballot, and they'll have to collect 1,000 signatures each.
Wow.
And they'll appear in the general election and not in any primary. The really important thing to understand, though, about how parties work in New York versus, or as opposed to independent runs, is that the parties all have the top lines. Whoever gets the most votes in the last gubernatorial election ends up at the top of the ballot, and then it's onward from there. So the Democrats will occupy the top slot, the Republicans will occupy the second position, and then you'll have all the parties listed out, and only then, after the parties have listed all their candidates, will you start to see the independently running
So when you're looking at your ballot and you've recognized the first couple of names, and then by the bottom you have no idea who's running.
Exactly.
It's those people, those non-affiliated people.
Right, and so this might sound like, oh, well, who cares? But there's a lot of studies that show that whoever's first on the ballot basically ends up with the most votes. There's a lot of correlation between your position on the piece of paper and how well you do, which is why in a regular election, the order of candidates is selected randomly, because they don't want to give somebody an advantage.
Interesting. All right, I want to go back to this for a second for some clarification.
Sure.
So people petition to run for a delegate.
Yes.
They'll be on the Democratic primary, Republican primary. Those people will all be put on the general election in November.
Well, whoever wins the primary.
Whoever wins the primary.
Yes.
Then there'll be 3 people elected, but the 3 people elected don't have to be from any particular party.
Correct. It'll be the top 3 vote getters in the general election.
Right. So you could live in a Democratic neighborhood, but the Republican candidates are super popular. So they could win, and then you'd have 3 Republican candidates. So there's no guarantee per se that the Constitutional Convention will necessarily be more democratic because it's a more democratic state. It all, at that point, depends on the election.
This is theoretically true. However, if you actually look at the breakdown of party registration and how votes have been cast in prior elections, we're very, 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 very likely to have a democratically run constitutional convention. And so whether you think a convention is a good idea or a bad idea really comes down to whether you think the people who will have a majority in the convention are on your side of the issues. So, as I just mentioned, we're extremely likely to have a Democratic controlled convention. And the reason is the Democrats have an outright majority in the state Senate. They control a majority of state Senate districts. The reason the Republicans control the state Senate, however, is because there are these breakaways, the Independent Democratic Conference, right? But they were still elected on the Democratic primary line.
Got it. Okay,
right?
So since we have both the majority in the Assembly and in the Senate, technically, their likelihood would be that there would be more.
There will almost guaranteed be more Democrats
Okay.
elected out of the Senate districts.
Right.
And it's unlikely that a lot of those folks, or any significant number, will also be IDC people, in my opinion, because they'll have to run and win in Democratic primaries, and there'll be at least 3 of them running. So it makes it really hard. I mean, these sorts of, I want to say conspiracies, but any sort of group cohesion benefits from a smaller number of people in it. As you add people, it becomes harder for people to control the dynamics, which makes it more likely that you'll just have regular sort of Democrats winning these elections, and it'll be difficult for an IDC sort of coalition to hold together delegates at the end. But
another way that that insidious IDC could come back to haunt people.
Yes, but even if they succeeded in having all of their delegates be IDC delegates, for example, even though there's no IDC line on the ballots, it would be difficult for them to signal to voters who to select. You'd still have that balanced out a little bit by the 15 at-large delegates who are elected statewide. So there's 15 folks who are elected by the state as a whole, and the state as a whole definitely tends to
when you
support
say
Democrats.
State as a whole, what does that mean?
So in the same way that we select governor, comptroller, and attorney general, the entire state votes in a single election statewide. There will be 15 delegates selected in that manner.
Got it.
And if all 3 of our statewide electeds, again, governor, comptroller, and attorney general, are Democrats, the odds are all 15 or very close to all 15 of those statewide delegates will be Democrats as well.
Where do those 15 come from? Like how do they petition differently than the people that are coming from the individual Senate district?
They basically run a campaign as if they were running for governor or one of these statewide elected positions. They will have to petition statewide. They'll need far more signatures than somebody running out of a Senate district. And
do they still get that deal where, what is it, if the clubs endorse you, then you don't need the signatures?
If a state committee endorses you. So if the Democratic State Committee endorses you, you don't need to collect signatures to get on the Democratic primary. If the Republican State Committee endorses you, you don't have to get signatures to be in the Republican primary, and so on. But you'll probably have a bunch of folks gathering signatures. Those statewide candidates, however, are much more likely to come from political parties because you need a lot of signatures. You're going to need 5% of all statewide voters to go directly to the general election as an independent, which is hard. It is very likely that those 15 will be chosen by the political parties, and even likelier still that the party doing the choosing will be the Democratic Party, and that election will really be about the Democratic primary. So don't sleep on the Democratic primary in 2018, especially if there's a constitutional convention, because that's going to be really, really important.
Really important. If it gets up to that, I mean, at this point, if it's voted no this November, this is all a moot point.
Right, exactly.
You don't have to worry about it. So we're at 9 minutes.
Yeah.
So in a minute or two, why would somebody vote yes? Why would somebody vote no?
You would vote yes if you don't think that the state legislature is handling the issues you care about. In particular, campaign finance reform issues, electoral reform issues. These are things that politicians might be good on any number of other things, but they really don't like messing with the rules that get them elected. So redistricting, for example, we have a terrible redistricting process. It was passed into the Constitution as an amendment actually 4 years ago, and that could only be undone through an amendment or a constitutional convention.
Oh, interesting.
You would vote no on a constitutional convention if you think that our Constitution protects things which are very important to you. We have great provisions for Forever Wild, which keeps the Adirondacks secure from any sort of development. There's a couple of things in there that benefit unions, and you'd vote no if you thought that things were not so bad, that it would be better to preserve what we have right now than take any risk of opening up those provisions.
Okay. It still seems to me, even with all the naysayers out there, the opportunity to really change things up in a system that really doesn't work well is appealing.
I cannot argue that there's a tremendous opportunity for change here, one way or the other. What the detractors are most concerned about, aside from their specific special interests being harmed, is that there's an unknown quantity of, money that can come in from Republicans or right-wing organizations that will elect all of these Republican or right-wing or alt-right delegates. This is a determination that people have to really make for themselves, but if you think that your district is going to elect good people, and you look at the rest of the state and you say, well, the whole thing's generally Democratic, then I don't want to come down too hard on one side or the other, but
That's very diplomatic of you.
There's an argument to be made that money could come in. There's a similar argument to be made that New York is a very big state with very entrenched voting patterns,
Right.
and they're not going to be able to upset the entire thing and turn New York into a Republican state overnight. It wouldn't be overnight. It would be over the course of a year, but still, New York is gigantic, New York City has really entrenched interests. I think the most likely outcome is a Democratic but relatively centrist establishment Democratic
Right.
constitutional convention in which some important things might be addressed and some of the really important things might just be, passed over entirely. Even though one would hope for all of the really important things like electoral reform to get attention.
And I remember you saying this way back, and you've repeated it again, that in the instances that there have been constitutional conventions, which were not very many, was it 5?
I forget the exact number. There's been a couple.
I think it's 5. That in the end, after all that money was spent, all that time and energy was put into the process, that none of those suggestions actually passed when they were voted on at the next election.
Oh, yeah. So last thing, and then I guess we'll cut out because we're already at 12 minutes. No matter what happens at the Constitutional Convention, all of the proposals get sent back to voters to vote on directly in the next election. Many things have come out of constitutional conventions which did pass. At the 1967 Constitutional Convention, voters rejected the entire slate of amendments, largely because it was put up as a slate and they didn't separate out the different proposals.
So it's just a one big yes or no instead of having
in 1967 it was. It doesn't have to be that way.
Was that the last time there was a
That was the last time there was a constitutional convention where things actually got put to the voters. But at the end of the day, then you also have to ask, do you think voters will vote to strip themselves of rights, of things like public education or what have you? If you think yes, then, be concerned. But if you think no, if you think voters can protect their own interests, then, that's a different rationale.
It's sort of like a Pandora's box.
Well, Pandora's box in Greek mythology was unequivocally bad.
Was unequivocally, right.
This is more like a genie's lantern.
Not necessarily I Dream of Genie.
Yes, because that was unequivocally good for whatever his name was.
Right, the astronaut. But, so somewhere in between. But for some people I could see, though, why they would think it's a Pandora's box, because even the thought of any change is bad. And to some people it'd be good, but for some people just keeping it as is far more comfortable than change whatsoever.
Indeed.
And the unknown could be scary, and that's the Pandora's.
And there are a lot of specific concerns which we won't address now, but if you have questions, because we're going to stop right now, feel free to send them in. You can comment on the video or on Facebook or wherever. Find me, I'm facebook.com/BenYeeNY, or just email me at ben@BenjaminYee, and Yee is Y-E-E. And, if we get a bunch of questions, we'll just answer them.
Yeah, awesome. All right, until next time.
Until then, bye.
Enjoy the sunset.